How are you feeling going into the vote?
Good. Good.
Yeah?
Sir, what's your tie?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was president 4 times.
Right.
So what's your case for why you'll be?
That's what this meeting's about.
Do you have the votes locked in, sir?
I'm not. I never count my chickens till they're hatched.
Congressman, if you lose the steering vote, will you contest it in caucus?
I don't intend to lose.
And he did not lose. That's Jerry Connolly there, the new chair of the House Oversight Committee, best in AOC. I'm Matt Leck on this Left Reckoning. Hello, David.
How's it going, brother?
It's, same old, same old.
Living in a decaying empire.
Exactly. Stymied, sort of any even notions towards progress stymied. So let's get right into it, folks. Ken Klippenstein has a piece here that I think kind of summarizes the main headline people are taking away from today. Does that not show up?
No,
I'm going to have to share that. That's crazy. Okay. I got it here. He says, dying congressman to lead watchdog committee. The gerontocracy wins again. And look, that's certainly one of the glaring issues with this. 74-year-old congressman stricken with an especially deadly form of cancer was chosen to be the top Democrat in charge of oversight, a watchdog role that will oversee investigations into public corruption and wrongdoing over the next 2 years. Now, what's interesting to me there in this thing with him besting AOC, as Nancy Pelosi calls in favors after a hip replacement, not metaphorical. She's literally fell and broke her hip, and then called in favors so that this vote would go this way to this guy with cancer. That's a probable terminal form of cancer. There's a few, so like everyone's focusing on the gerontocratic angle of it, and I'll say like there's another tweet here by I can't share those. That's really annoying.
Yeah, it's your green screen. Yeah.
But that's all right. I can still present. But Dan Pfeiffer here, he said valuing seniority over political messaging chops is exactly how Democrats got into this mess in the first place. And I'll just say, like, I don't think that this is really what this is about. This isn't about Democrats just loving seniority. Because if you'll remember, or maybe people don't, but this was the last chair of that. It was a guy named Jamie Raskin. And just read a little bit of this here. Raskin gets top Democratic slot on U.S. House Oversight Committee. That's December 22nd, if you can remember, way back into December 22nd, 2022. I am truly humbled and honored beyond measure to be elected ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Raskin said, blah, blah, blah. To win the post, Raskin leapfrogged 2 more senior members on the panel who were also seeking the top Democratic slot, Connolly and Massachusetts Representative Stephen Lynch. Lynch withdrew from the race earlier this week after receiving just 7 votes in the steering committee tally. Raskin picked up 30 votes there and Connolly got 19. So this whole notion that this is about seniority, well, it wasn't last time. They wanted to get the guy who they thought was really good at taking it to Trump over corruption, and they just said, we're going to put you over Connolly. They didn't do that this time. That's a choice. That's a political choice that isn't process. Some things I think I would just point out are the differences in the district represented here. Obviously similar populations. Poverty rate is quite a big disparity. You'll be surprised that Jerry Connolly's district is a much lower poverty rate than AOC's at 5.2% versus 18.3%. Also, the median household income, as property value is pretty much same. It's very expensive to own property in New York, so about $600,000 to about $665,000. But median household income is double. Connolly's at $150,000 and AOC's at 65. So that is, I think, the big things that are going on, or the sort of underlying dynamics here. That again, a party that has saw Cori Bush and Jabal Bowman, two of the lower income representatives, removed from Congress and replaced by more suburban friendly representatives. This is a gentrifying party.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to put it, Matt. And I mean, look, there's some strategic things we can get to in just a second, particularly with AOC. But I'll just say that this also really exposes, I think, a fundamental rot within the Democratic Party. Right? We can get really into the weeds about social strategy and all this kind of stuff, but it is a party that is just so hostile to grassroots energy, to new folks. And I'm not just talking about the leadership. I'm sure this is similar in states all across the country, but I know here in Texas, where that's not even the party in power, people who go and try to join their local county Democratic Party in rural Texas tell me this all the time. We showed up at a meeting that had 15 people in it. They were all old, and they did everything that they could to sort of prevent us from participating and bringing new energy and new ideas into the party, right? So there's certainly an age thing, but I think you can lose yourself in the age aspect of it as well, and forget that there's a structural aspect to the Democratic Party that doesn't want people who might shake things up a little bit, who might start challenging and asking questions about hey, yeah, why does it seem that so much of our party's priorities seem to be written by and for the interests of the elite and the hyper wealthy in this country? Right? It's just something that they're so allergic to this basic kind of democratic accountability.
Yeah, and just a few other things to note about Connolly. Co-sponsored PayGo in 2010 with, I believe, Nancy Pelosi, saying we need to balance this damn budget. We need to stop talking about all these people getting thrown, all the people thrown out of their homes, and they were concerned with balancing the United States budget. These Democrats were. So thanks for that, and all the electoral dividends that's played out. Oh, another thing. This is an article from all of 4 years ago. The members of Congress who profit from war. Here are some senators. Let's just scroll down, shall we? Let's go past the senators and into the representatives. Okay, here we go. What's the second name we see there? So it's the top name, Steve Cohen from Tennessee, 400,000 from Northrop Grumman. Number 2, we got our boy Jerry Connolly. Would you look at that? Also, both the top 3 Democrats, even our boy Ro Khanna there. Hey, Ro. So that's an interesting third name there. But let's just stick with Jerry Connolly here. House Oversight and Reform Committee Operations Subcommittee Chairman Rep. Connolly. So he's been there for a while. Is it good that a guy on the Oversight Committee is taking a lot of money from military contractors? Owns as much as $400,000 worth of stock in Leidos, which has paid billions of dollars to provide information services for the Defense Department. In May 2019, Leidos CEO Roger Crone testified before Connolly's committee. Oh, nice. In favor of legislation calling on the government to guarantee back pay for contractors in the wake of government shutdowns. So nice constituent service there from our boy, Jerry Connolly.
And remember, these kind of investments pay dividends, right? A lot of people's conception of money in politics is sort of money for votes, right? And certainly, that can happen to a certain extent, but it's also getting information. And the way that lobbying works in DC is that most of the lobbyists for these big corporations know far in advance when there's any kind of whispering of these industries or certain topics being investigated by Congress, and they call up their boys and they give them the information that they need. They let them know how they're going to do this and what they're going to talk about and all this kind of stuff, right? And yeah, it's probably not a good thing for somebody charged with oversight to be so in bed with these figures.
To be number 2 in defense stocks.
It's crazy. And this is the thing too, is everyone who watches this program, we already know about the horrors of the Republican Party. We don't have to get into that. But the fact of the matter is that you are delusional if you aren't recognizing that the Democratic Party is very beholden to these interests, and in fact represent a portion of the ruling class and these kind of nasty groups that any kind of left populist, just general pro-democracy party in this country would need to come up against if they were to seriously reform the American system, right? A system that across the political spectrum, Americans are all saying it's time for change. you would need to take these forces on, and it's just abundantly clear that the Democratic Party is just as bought out as the Republicans are on these issues.
Yeah, and understand in the recrimination when people are saying we're too far left or whatever, they're just defending the Connollys. Like they're just defending the corporate
Yeah.
interest plans that are there. Of course, they need to point the win. AOC, and look again, we've talked plenty at length with Ryan Grimm most recently about AOC, but she nonetheless secured votes in a way that a lot of Democrats can't. And this idea that
And sorry, Matt, I just want to be abundantly clear about what you're saying. AOC did better than Kamala Harris in her district, right? And as the Democratic Party are losing voters, particularly of certain class position, education, and race in this country, AOC showed a counter argument that the Democrats should have a self-interest in maybe learning about why she's doing better than they are.
Yep. And you can just look at their districts, because that Virginia 11th, not so keen on learning that kind of lesson. There's different sorts of, Lidos, Lidos in AOC's district.
Well, do we want to talk about the AOC aspect here, Matt?
Yeah. I think, you were saying before you had a good take on this. I think a lot of it is kind of in line with what we've been saying with Ryan.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think there's two big lessons here, and I would actually like to talk a little bit about like the long-term strategy after this, but just two quick responses. Is that, look, it seems very clearly that all of the kind of political maneuvering that AOC has done, all the kind of public-facing maneuvering, not to mention private conversations that she's doing, have not done enough to kind of ingratiate herself with the Democratic Party, right? Again, just on a level of self-preservation, we're not even talking about a socialist movement or left movement or anything like that. Just a Democratic Party that might want to, I don't know, win elections and not lose to people like Donald Trump. They should have plenty of interest in putting somebody like AOC in this position, especially at a moment, as you've noted and other people have noted, when they aren't in power. So this is a position that is very much set up to grill nasty figures, to get those kind of social media bites, to get people's, to capture people's interest and, attention towards the Democratic Party, saying, oh, that's a party that's questioning these folks as to why they're doing this or that, right? AOC is very good at that. I'm sorry, Connolly is not. It's just on pure media skill, right? One person is going to look a lot better on camera asking questions to corrupt folks, and one person is not. And they decided to go with the person who's going to be worse at the job, at the symbolic position.
Speak symbolic, he's got esophageal cancer. Like they were a little bit on the nose here.
So there's just that reality that the Democratic Party doesn't even have like a self-preservation strategy at this point, right? Then there's the other one, is that, for all of the kind of claims about AOC, CIAOC, or whatever that you hear online, the Democratic Party is definitely afraid of somebody like AOC being put into a position like that, because they are afraid of what her politics represent. Now, is this David saying, oh, the AOC's politics are my politics? No, I'm just trying to draw a line so it's clear to people that there still is something there that freaks these people out, which is why they are so committed to squashing it. Right. Yeah. And I want to talk about the strategic implications, but I think people really do need to understand that within the Democratic Party, they still are definitely afraid of people like AOC, of people like Ilhan Omar, that just like they were afraid of people like Bowman and people like Cori Bush.
Absolutely.
So, let's talk about the strategic aspect here. As you noted, Matt, and everyone knows, because it's been publicized. It's not something that was coming out from, shoe leather reporters, like really getting the scoop. Nancy Pelosi really put her thumb on the scale to make sure that people voted against AOC for this position. And that, I think, more than anything, shows that the strategy of trying to play nice with the Democratic Party, trying to play nice with the Democratic leadership, has just failed. It's failed on so many levels. It's failed even on the individual level of those congressional members who have sort of followed that strategy, right, for their own careers, like not even talk about the movement, just for them. It hasn't helped them. They still have the knives out for them. And it's certainly hurt our movement dramatically because it's much harder to make the case, right, to the public about the difference between those people's politics and people's like Connolly and people like Nancy Pelosi and people like Kamala Harris, because you're on TV saying, oh, these people are working hard for you. These people are standing up for your values, when they're not. They just are not. And, I can get I don't agree with it, but there was a point where like you could at least understand maybe the logic of somebody saying, hey, you know, the Democrats and all the money cannons that are pointed at us, it's a lot for us to take on. So why don't we show them that we can govern with the Democratic Party, that we can be a part of this coalition, and maybe they'll reward us with, you know, some parts of the coalition so that we can do this or that for working people. Right. And that was the kind of strategy, particularly the strategy of AOC, you know, once Biden got elected. And I mean, 4 years later, I mean, that section of the Democratic Party is weaker than they've ever been. They haven't gained strength. In fact, you know, that bench has shrunk, not grown. And as we see right here, that even on a position where it would be a win-win for everybody, it really would. Like, it really would for the Democrats to have somebody like AOC in this position, because as we said, she would do well at it. She would look good on camera. She would ask the right questions, you know, all this kind of stuff, particularly when you're going up against a Trump administration that is going to be doing all these kind of horrible things. It helps to have people associate the Democratic brand with attacking Trump and the corruption that we're sure to be seeing. But they're so definitely afraid of that part of their party, of that part of their coalition, gaining any kind of public strength. And there's no doubt about it that the worry with AOC is that they don't want her to build up her brand, particularly if she wants to run for Senate seat in New York. You know, I mean, we've been talking about this since the beginning of Left Reckoning, Matt, about like how we should, you know, operate in and around people like AOC, people like the Squad. And I think one of the things, as we talk about with Ryan Grimm, that I think is really important for people who are serious about doing politics, who are serious about building an alternative, that, you know, people like AOC really didn't think that they came out of the movement, that in fact, that they were doing the movement's favors when they were talking about them and noting their connections to it, not that they sort of owed something to those movements. And right now, where I think the question is just abundantly and kind of clear as it's ever been, that to do anything in this country to take on the rot that Trump represents, but also to take on the rot that Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden represent, we will need to have a political organization, political movement that stands on its own 2 feet and is able to point at both of those institutions, as Bernie Sanders said recently. All right. You know, a party, the Democratic Party, that has turned their backs on working people. And I hope I don't hold my breath or anything like that. I would just say in a better world, people like AOC, I think, would recognize that and take on a more, you know, agitational role towards people in the Democratic Party, because they haven't been rewarded for it. In fact, that they have been
rewarded more when they were doing the former.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of where that movement is at, where those politics need to go. And, you know, who knows? We'll see, you know, if Greg Casar, as the new leader of the Progressive Caucus, is able to move some things around. But I'll tell you, structurally, that party is against them. And I think as soon as possible, progressives, and certainly people who consider themselves democratic socialists who are in Congress, need to take the position of take an adversarial position to the leadership of this party, because that party is against working people. It's against Palestinians. And it's also against you. It's also against you, members of Congress. They would like you to lose your seat. They do not want you to succeed.
And how you present that publicly, you know, is one thing, but that should absolutely be the understanding privately among anybody sort of working in that. Like, if there's any I mean, and we can appreciate AOC, you know, running the test so purely because she has given them every opportunity to say, okay, you're in. And they go with a guy with esophageal cancer. Who is, again, like a big military industrial guy. So, you know,
that chapter needs to be over. Simple as that. All right, Matt, we're going to go over to this conversation with Matt Sitman. People should definitely be listening to Know Your Enemy if you aren't already. You know, it's always, you know, I really have enjoyed doing this with you, Matt, over these years. And there's a lot of guests that we have on this program whose work I really, really respect. And Matt Sitman is one of them. I really loved having the opportunity to have him on the program, chatting with him. We'll, you know, y'all watch it. We'll be talking about populism, Trump, Bill Clinton, but most importantly, Willie Nelson. So really happy to have Matt Sitman on the program, and hopefully, you know, the first of many.
And here it is, folks.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm really excited. I mean, I don't even know how to introduce it because we got two Matts today. We have Matt Leck, my good friend and comrade, and Matt Sitman. You know him as the host of Know Your Enemy, in addition to being an incredible writer, someone whose work I very much respect. Matt, how are you doing?
Doing all right. I was very interested to learn that you call your listeners Reckoners, because I feel like Wreckers would have a different vibe to it, you know? I mean, maybe that's what the country needs right now, you know, some more left Wreckers, but Reckoners is kind of cool,
I think
too.
we've had enough Wreckers on the left.
Yeah.
Well, we have covered the LaRouchites a little bit, so
Yeah.
Reckoners sounds like a great, like, pro wrestling tag team name, maybe, or The Reckoner, you know? Since we are living in the WWE era of, you know, national politics with Linda McMahon.
Were you a WWE guy back in the day?
I mean, back then, I'm old enough that it was WWF.
Oh, shit.
But I was enough into it as a kid that, you know, like 9 years old. This also will date me, but you actually used to have to go to the cable company and get, like, the apparatus to do the pay-per-view, you know, whether it was like a boxing match or the pro wrestling. So I have distinct memories of, like, you know, my mom taking us to the cable company and getting the box to watch, like, you know, Survivor Series 1, you know, or
that's incredible.
Yeah, or SummerSlam, the one where I think the Ultimate Warrior won a championship. Like, I watched that stuff live, and so it's actually shocking to me now. And maybe it shouldn't be, but you know, Linda McMahon could be our Secretary of Education, and you know, I think it's remarkable that both Trump and Linda McMahon have received the Stone Cold Stunner.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking in the run up to the election. Did you see the Undertaker interview with Trump?
No, I didn't. Oh,
yeah,
man.
He went on like the Undertaker's podcast or whatever.
Because he's been showing up a lot in like, pop culture recently.
Yeah,
like, he's been at football games and stuff. Yeah, anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
No, so Trump goes on the Undertaker's podcast. And then I thought the Undertaker's, you know, in the WWF universe, WWE universe, his brother Kane gave a pile driver to Linda McMahon too. So like we have like Trump being... We actually live in a world where the incoming president was interviewed by The Undertaker, and the incoming Secretary of Education was given a pile driver by The Undertaker's supposed brother in the WWF universe. Incredible times.
I mean,
sorry for that rant.
No. I mean, it's a big show right now, and like I'll tell you, I think a lot of people were expecting a different ending to this season, and you know, I wanted to have you on to talk about some of the things that are going on the right, but you know, first, I mean, I just have to ask, you know. I mean, how has it been in the past, you know, month or so, sort of reckoning with, you know, these election results? I mean, how shocked were you, you know, with how things turned out?
Right before the 2020 election, I did an interview with Luke Savage of Jacobin, and Sam Ether Bell, my great friend and Know Your Enemy co-host. We did this interview with Luke, and you know, one thing I was really struck by, I went back and read it recently, was I was like, you know, one thing we know is Trump is not popular. Like, there was no universe in 2020 when I thought he would win the you know, more votes than Joe Biden. It was only a matter of would he, you know, get the right margins in certain key states to win the Electoral College vote. Like, I was certain about that. Like 100% certain. You know, just no doubt about it. But in the run-up to this election, I didn't say anything like that. I didn't predict Trump would win. We can get into some of the reasons why I thought Kamala might be able to pull it out. But, you know, I was very, in that sense, approaching the election differently than I had in the past. I thought Trump could win. The only reason I was a little surprised was, A, because of the polling, right? Once again, kind of underestimated Trump's strength. But I think I totally misread, I will admit this, something like the Madison Square Garden rally, right? There was a kind of idea I had in my head that Trump was sort of limping across the finish line, right? Like, he seemed a little tired there for a while. The Elon Musk stuff, like running around the country, giving people $1 million checks, was both like ominous, but also weird. Mm-hmm. And then the Madison Square Garden rally, you know, we all know the comments that were made, right? Puerto Rico's a floating island of garbage. I really thought, like, I don't know, that got a lot of attention because it was at Madison Square Garden. All the press was there. I thought, I don't know, calling Puerto Rico a floating pile of garbage might cost Trump at the margins, you know, with Puerto Rican voters, which are, you know, a non-negligible kind of constituency in you know, certain key states. So I misread that. And so I wasn't shocked, but I was a little surprised, I think, by how well Trump did across the board in the sense of, you know, winning the close states, you know, kind of the demographic groups he did better with. But maybe I'll just make one more comment about that. I think what I misunderstood, and I think in the weeks since the election, you know, you asked how I'm doing, I'm very annoyed, right? Because this election was lost for many, many reasons, which gives kind of pundits, kind of somewhat valid arguments to make about why their particular approach would have done better. When you lose the way Harris did, which it was Trump did not win a massive mandate, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's now under 50% of the vote, actually, once, California rolled in slowly, but surely. So I'm not talking about a ridiculous kind of idea of a mandate. I'm not trying to say Trump is more popular than he is. He's not, but he did better than I expected. And I think the reason was things that I was interpreting as bad for him, as negatives from some of the legal stuff. Like, I'm someone on the left who took January 6th extremely seriously. Through something like the Madison Square Garden rally, which I thought was just like in what universe is that kind of what you want to, like drive to the finish line of your campaign with? And what I think I missed was everything that I've just been describing critically as negative that I thought would hurt Trump. I think they just reinforced the fact that he was the anti-system, kind of anti-status quo candidate. And there's a way in which, all the kind of legal problems Trump had, again, which a lot of them I took seriously. There's some that were, didn't deserve to be taken as seriously. And for all the criticisms of a legal approach to dealing with Trump, of which I'm sympathetic, that the courts, the Department of Justice, the attorneys general, those are all part of the system that people are mad at. And so I think I underestimated the way Trump, whether it was his kind of problems with the legal system and, the crimes he did commit to, January 6th and its fallout to some of his campaign choices, all those things that I thought, Harris might be able to pull this out. It turns out I think they were actually reinforcing Trump's identity as the anti-status quo candidate.
In a way, I mean, he almost feels more of the anti-status quo candidate in this most recent election than he did in 2016 in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, because he could say they were going after me in a way he couldn't before. And then I would just add to that, I think that helps explain too, like there's a universe in which, if you squint, okay, campaigning with Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
I am, viscerally kind of disgusted by it. But maybe, in certain states, I don't know, there's an argument you could make, right? If you're trying to narrowly win an election. But I think, putting that aside, I think, doing things like hugging Liz Cheney and kind of embracing those endorsements. It turns out that was this was the perfect storm of Harris leaning into her, I'm the safe status, I'm going to preserve liberal, our democracy, which is really saying I'm going to preserve the status quo in a way. And embracing the Cheneys was kind of, only added to that, as what Trump was doing accentuated his outsider status.
I'm curious, Matt, what you think about. I've been really pissed at Obama and Clinton since then. That's how I've been reacting. And, I don't want to make a direct comparison between Trump's malfeasance. I think he's a criminal for a long time before he was in politics. But also, I think there's a certain way that conservatives were scandalized by Bill Clinton, by a lot of propaganda, but also they went on a fishing expedition and they caught a fish with him perjuring himself and things like that. And I'm curious, there's no sort of, I guess, awareness by, I don't think I maybe took to heart, I saw people in my family in North Dakota, they hated Bill Clinton. They thought he was just completely atrocious. And I see liberals reacting that way to Trump, not understanding that they're the reason in part people hate this establishment. I'm just curious, if you have any thoughts on Bill Clinton.
I mean, frankly, there's sort of the arguments you can make about Bill Clinton's policies, right? Which, people like us on the left, criticize all the time. Again, I would join in those criticisms. But I actually think as a man, as a person, I find Bill Clinton especially disgusting. I mean, to me, I think it's unforgivable, especially for a Democrat. When he was campaigning for president in 1992, I forget whether it was technically in 1991, during the primaries, but the 92 campaign, right? When he sort of pressed pause on his campaign to make sure he could fly down to Arkansas to oversee the execution of Ricky Ray Rector, right? A kind of mentally disabled African-American man who, at his last meal, actually, he wanted to save the dessert for later. That's how impaired he was, right? So I just find someone like Bill Clinton, exploiting that issue like that and basically saying you're not going to call me Michael Dukakis, right? You're not going to tar me as someone who likes black people a little too much, maybe, you know, you're not going to tar me as soft on crime. And so that kind of thing I find totally despicable. And then, you know, these recent interviews of his, I mean, there's so much I could say about Bill Clinton, Matt. Like, you opened up a can of worms. Like, this is where the late Christopher Hitchens was totally right. Like, he had the Clintons dead to rights. In his book on the Clintons, I think it's come out under different titles, but like No One Left to Lie To is the main title. Like, I do like that holds up. You know, yeah, there's a lot to say about Bill Clinton, but these recent interviews of him, it was just a reminder to me of what a disgusting creature I find him. You know, just kind of sitting back and lecturing and talking about people like us who wear ties to work. It's like, fuck you. I can swear on here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I was about to bring that interview up because it really is so out of touch. I mean, you know, in Texas, there has been this kind of dream that Texas is going to shift blue with demographic shifts, and that's been shown to be just completely wrong.
Right.
You know, actually dangerously wrong for at least the way that the state Democratic Party is operating here, and probably even for the National Democratic Party. But one thing that's really interesting is that, like, when you go and you interview people who don't vote or stop voting in this state, which Texas Monthly did, which is a great thing. It's very rare for for non-voters to get interviewed. And it was so fascinating to read. I'll link the piece in the show notes for people. But like, it was really fascinating to read all these people, particularly in the Rio Grande Valley and some of these areas that really switched from, Democrat stronghold to Republicans' most recent election. And people cited Bill Clinton and Barack Obama as people who they hoped would change the system, people who they voted for, and people who they felt personally betrayed by. And, a lot of the campaigning that we saw, was about you save democracy, all of this kind of stuff. But it was also, let's return back, to the old days. And, that's just a kind of question. It's like, were the 90s good for you? Were like the 2010s good for you? And you're going to get different answers with different folks. But for a lot of working people, they understand the world around them a lot better than I think pundits recognize, particularly including like left-wing pundits recognize. People are like, oh, they don't understand NAFTA and all this. No, people actually, when you go and talk to them, they have a much better understanding of the world around them than they get credit for.
Yes. No, I want to mention something in particular. One kind of argument I've made before is that in some ways, like this era now, the current era, call it the Trump era if you want. I do feel like, go back to 2016. It wasn't just Trump. Like Bernie Sanders almost knocked Hillary Clinton off. Like that was an incredibly close primary. So I feel like, putting aside all the debates about the 2016 primary, you look at that year, there clearly was something afoot, right? There clearly was a populist kind of, backlash to, I think, especially, Obama's handling of the financial crisis, who got bailed out and who didn't. And kind of what we're seeing now is something of a delayed, Obama was kind of like an 8-year parentheses where people gave him a shot to fix it. To bring the hope and change. And when he didn't, I think not only did, the material conditions of the working class people because of his financial policies, not only like was that a factor, but I think it really was like the almost messianic expectations. Do you remember the ad that the McCain campaign put out that summer of 2008, which was the celebrity ad? That Obama was this like, valorized celebrity, glitz and glamour, traveling all over the world. And it kind of like picked up on something. Because remember, he won the Nobel Peace Prize before he even took office. Like there was a slightly ridiculous, maybe, people got their expectations too high. But on the other hand, I remember the DNC, the Democratic Convention that year in 2008. When, Obama became the nominee, he actually said, not the day he won the presidency, but the day he became the nominee, that this is the day when the oceans will begin to recede and the earth will heal. Simply becoming the Democratic nominee. He got up on stage and said that. And I just feel like there was the real policies, the kind of results of them that, again, we know who benefited and who wasn't bailed out, who was hurt. But there's also the expectations that he himself raised in kind of extraordinary ways at times as a candidate.
Yeah, they have those graphs that people who don't like to point to, like poverty rate or savings, they'll point to, look, Americans don't understand their economic situation because their views on sort of optimism change wildly given who's in office. But I was one of those people who would have said, okay, it's 2014. I prefer Obama to the Romney Republicans in the economy, right? But also, if you would have asked me 3 years later, I'd be like, yeah, man, they didn't do fucking enough and they completely goddamn blew it. Like, those polls don't mean anything. And except I think they do kind of tell a story that people are getting sick of the treatment of, especially the political economy.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to talk a little bit about realignment and de-alignment in a second, but first I have to ask, was Sohab Armari and all the folks at Compact right about America? I mean, do we see this victory of Trump as a kind of vindication of these people who've been saying that there's going to be this new working class Republican Party?
I mean, it's very strange, right? In that there is evidence for that, right? In terms of, I mean, I thought Tim Barker's New Left Review piece, where he argued that, like, really the working class as such didn't do anything, right? If like Trump winning 51%, say, of a certain income or educational category, that's not the entire working class, right? Kamala's still winning 48% of voters under $100,000, voters without a college degree. And she did win, actually, if you break it down a little more specifically, under $30,000, right? She did win. So, that all said, you can over extrapolate from the results. And I appreciated Tim Barker's caution on that. I think he's basically right. However, I would say that there was a bit of truth maybe to what the Compact people were saying descriptively. I mean, Trump did win. On the other hand, like, what the fuck is Elon Musk, who's constantly at President Trump's former and future President Trump's side? This Department of Government Efficiency is, just typical right-wing bullshit, right? Of, wanting to strip the federal bureaucracy.
Well, do you think that's real?
Spare parts. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, right? Because first of all, there is no Department of Government Efficiency, right? There's no department called that. There is a part of me that expects at some point, you just have to know, Trump will get really pissed at Elon for stealing the spotlight or taking credit for something or who knows what, right? Like, that seems unstable to me. These two, like, narcissistic maniacs, right? Like, running around the country together and having dinner together all the time. Something's got to give. But so, if you look at who's voting for Republicans, this was another data point in the voters, the Republican voters becoming more working class in some way, continuing to do better with, voters without a college degree and voters under $100,000. Now that's might not be like, the best, how like we would define the working class, but, as approximations, Trump is doing better with them. There does seem to be some, if you look at even who Trump nominated to be Secretary of Labor, right? Like, you don't have to give him more credit than he deserves for that, but that's not who Mitt Romney would have picked, or George W. Bush would have picked, or George H.W. Bush or Reagan would have picked, right? Well, like there is, like, you can, if you squint, you can see that there's something to the argument. The devil's in the details, in the specifics. But again, so there's are arguments you can make. There are things you can point to that to kind of give credence to someone like, what Sohab Armari wants to have happen. On the other hand, like, what's populist about the world's richest man running around the country campaigning with Trump? I actually think that was something, because we're all terminally online, like Elon lives in our heads now since he bought Twitter.
He lives in my town now too, so.
Okay, yeah, that's right. You're a Texas guy. But you know what I mean? Like, we're used to seeing him spout idiotic things, every single day on Twitter. I think there was a way in which, journalistically, and maybe even the reporting, like, it was not made a big enough deal of the fact that the world's richest man literally was running around the country, cutting $1 million checks and giving them to people, and giving these weird, like, campaign rally kind of talks, and, flying around the country with Trump. Like, that's never happened before, right? And it seems, to me, that's just a great variable in what's going to happen going forward. Because I just don't know, like, does Musk have something on Trump? Like, is this, like, there's so much overlap between kind of like Musk's Twitter and people talking about the Diddy list, right? And Epstein stuff. And, like, I'm just like, I don't know what's happening. I don't mean that in any kind of conspiratorial way. I just mean, like, I don't know what the hell Elon Musk, I know he's self-interested. I know some of what he wants to do and why, I can guess why he wants to do it. But overall, to me, that's just this, it was a part of the campaign that I thought actually didn't receive enough attention. And to me, it's this wild card going forward about, what the hell's going to happen.
Well, I mean, I think I will just say as a side note on Musk, like there is a part of Musk that I think we have to sometimes think like very like individually about it. Is that like this is a guy who moved all of his companies to Texas because he didn't want the government to regulate them or investigate him for his wrongdoings. He moved them here, and they killed a guy at the Tesla factory, or a person died while building the Tesla factory. He's doing all that stuff in South Texas, and now the federal government's investigating him and pushing back against his permits because he's just brazenly, not following the federal government. So the hope, this is somebody who's never had any issue with trying to suck up to the government to get his way, and Trump might be the perfect person to suck up to, in at least certainly better than Kamala. But I mean, expanding it a little bit, I mean, I think the hardest thing for any of those people who want to make the Republican Party is now a working class party argument, the hardest part of that argument for them to make, is how this is able to sustain itself outside of Donald Trump. I mean, like even Hawley, who's like, I think the big person that people will kind of focus on. I don't know if you've seen the whispering that he's going to write a new version of the PRO Act.
I have
that
seen
it's going to be,
that.
but it's like, what is it? It's Mighty Men of Valor kind of just like, like I can't imagine that it's going to
don't
be
masturbate.
substantial. I mean, because these guys, I mean, look, and they've shown up at different events and whatever. That's fascinating. But they don't really tend to show up in a kind of material way for folks. But maybe, I don't know, maybe we are just in a moment where spectacle and image is more important than action.
I mean, that could definitely be the case for sure.
Yeah. Well, on this, like you're somebody who knows the right, and you've been, keeping up, I'm sure, with some of the people who are surrounding Trump right now. I mean, is it kind of clear any kind of faction amongst the American right that you might be seeing as like kind of being up in this new Trump administration? Is it too early to tell? Is there like a unity, or is it just a kind of big conflict similar to the way that it was in 2016, where there's a lot of different people who had their own designs on the Trump administration trying to get their foot into the door?
I mean, that's a great question. And I'm not sure, we're kind of trying to read the tea leaves now, right? But I would say, there are two conversations we've had on Know Your Enemy. One with Ian Ward, who's a reporter at Politico, and who, he's done a lot of really great work on J.D. Vance in particular, and has sat down and talked to Vance and had, a few hours of FaceTime with him, followed Vance on the campaign trail. And then more recently with Kurt Mills, the editor of The American Conservative, who's, mostly interested in foreign policy. And we talked about Trump's picks, right, for his cabinet and staff, mostly in the foreign policy dimension. And from both of those conversations, my sense is there are still real factional fighting going on. Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, right? Her critics in the Republican Party call her a neocon, kind of an unreconstructed kind of Bush type Republican. On the other hand, and add to that some like Marco Rubio, right? Who, is probably, he's moved in a more populist direction economically, but as Kurt Mills said, he's probably most unreconstructed actually in terms of foreign policy. He's probably going to be Secretary of State. It's not clear if Pete Hegseth will be confirmed. Tulsi Gabbard is Director of National Intelligence, right? There's just like a lot, like I'm rambling a little bit, but that's just to say there are still factions, right? There are people you can identify as like more pre-Trump Republicans who are a little, frankly, more competent, someone like Wiles. And then they're like the deranged, like Seb Gorka, right, is being appointed to something.
RFK.
RFK, like Tulsi at, again, at Director of National Intelligence. These are Michael Anton, right, like Director of Policy Planning, one of those key State Department positions. So there's clearly jockeying going on. There's not just ideological and policy, but like personal, dimensions to this. Like Trump, like we have to go back and think of like Versailles, right? In the court around the French monarch, like in the jostling for his favor, like who's up and who's down, like who's sitting where at what dinner. Like there is a dimension of that with Trump especially that has to be considered. And my sense is that, like Ian Ward again mentioned to us that like Don Jr. really, really was pro J.D. Vance as the VP pick. And so clearly, Don Jr. has Trump's ear and is very, I think, kind of personally close with Vance, actually. Like, they're texting buddies. And so I'm really interested in, like, what issues J.D. Vance will get his way on, what kind of his portfolio ends up being, and kind of the nuttier people who are much more MAGA or much more Trumpy than maybe his, first slate of cabinet members in 2016. They're also the most kind of unstable to me. Like, Putting Pete Hegseth in charge of the Department of Defense, one of like the largest bureaucracies in the world, you know, how's that going to go? I just don't know. And so there's, the policy, the personal, the practical. To me, I do think I'm more worried in some ways, actually, this time around. I mean, someone like Kash Patel at FBI. I mean, my God, like the you know, the kind of havoc he could wreak. You know, someone like if Matt Gaetz had been at, you know, Attorney General, right? Like those kind of picks. I do think it's fair to say that in comparison to Trump 2016, even though Trump 2016, there was a lot of kind of chaos around him, especially as he came into office. The transition was a joke, you know. I do think there were people around him who actually did restrain him to some way. Like, I actually think in hindsight, like, it's easy at the time, like people say, oh, it's important that so-and-so actually took this position, right? At the time, you're like, yeah, but what kind of principle is that? But I will just say, to give you an example, someone like Bill Barr, right? Trump's last confirmed attorney general, I believe. Like, he's devoted his entire life to helping Republican presidents get away with crimes. Right? Like going back to Watergate. Like that is Bill Barr's mission on earth, is to help Republican presidents commit and get away with crimes. And, you know, after December 14th of 2020, when the electors of the Electoral College gathered to cast their votes, which is all, January 6th was just confirming that December 14th vote. And Trump didn't drop the election denial shit. Barr walked, you know, which you don't have to give him a lot of credit for that. But I'm just saying there were people, chief of staffs like John Kelly, right? Like people who were, you know, politically pretty odious, but like relatively in contact with reality, like as human beings. And this time around, you know, we're getting the nuts right away. And I mean, to me, it's very combustible, and I really don't know how it will go.
Cognitively, do you think we're in for a rerun? Because Trump is the same age about Biden was when he entered his term this time. And I thought that he was slowing himself, and it was just hidden by the fact that Joe Biden was completely deteriorating. But I think that's another scary thing, is like how likely is he just to say, hey, Trump Jr., what should I do? Because he's like, you know, in his 80s now.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, like Trump's health is a mystery to me. Like for one, because he hasn't released the records, right, that most presidents have. You know, I mean, do you know what's really insane to think about is Ronnie Jackson being the White House doctor, right? Who's like proven himself to be a total lunatic now that he's in Congress. And like you read these stories of the Trump White House essentially being like a pill mill, right? Like probably the easiest place to get Adderall in Washington, D.C. was like the Trump White House, right? And of course the doctor that wrote him the note when he was a candidate, right? The crazy looking guy in New York City, like he's passed away.
Leaning way back in his chair, yeah.
Yeah, like, so I don't know, but I will say this. Trump is not that far away from the age his father was when he started showing signs of dementia. And that does tend to be, you know, run in families, can be hereditary. So like, I don't know what to think, but you know, Trump, he could kill over tomorrow, right? He's in his late 70s and he eats McDonald's constantly. And so I'm very afraid that, you know, J.D. Vance is one like cheeseburger driven heart attack away from the presidency. That scares the hell out of me. But yeah, more broadly, like, thank you, Matt. Yeah. You know, more broadly, it's just like, yeah, I don't know how his health might play out, because I think it'll be a little more obvious, or like, I don't think he'll be able to try to hide it the way Biden did, because Trump is so out there. His whole political persona is so driven by the big campaign rallies, right? The MAGA rallies, and kind of his showmanship. I think we'll know if Trump is really declining.
Yeah.
That's, you know, I will say I did go back for my sins and watch one of the 2016 debates with Hillary Clinton again, Trump versus Hillary. And he was much, much sharper. Like, I know that sounds kind of funny to say, but he was, at the time,
energetic.
Of course, we all thought, yeah, he was crisper. He was on his talking points more. He was more energetic. And I hate to say this, but more disciplined in a way. So Trump has really declined, and being president doesn't help that. And so I do think that's like a legitimate question mark. Trump will be, by the end of his term, the oldest, you know, president in American history.
Well, I mean, you know,
should he serve all 4 years?
It's a very exciting time, very worrying times, honestly. And the thought of a JD Vance, following him is something that will keep you up at night. So, for all of us who are listening to this and we're getting a little nervous, Matt, in addition to being a great writer and podcaster and mine, you're also a great fan of country music. And I couldn't have you on the podcast without asking you, if you have any listening suggestions for our left reckoners out there, what's playing right now?
Well, I do. I actually gave this some thought, and just for a little bit of background, I mean, David, I've been a Willie Nelson fan for a long, long time. I first saw Willie live when I was in college, right? And so I'm a longtime Willie fan, but I would say in the last year and a half, I've somehow, my Willie fascination and fandom with him has just gone into overdrive. And in particular, this past year or so, I've actually done a very slow and steady working my way through Willie's catalog.
It's a big one.
It's huge. And I haven't done it all. There's so many releases, no streaming service has it all. But I will say that I've become really fascinated by Willie's output in the 70s, where he really came to find himself creatively. He'd been kind of stuck in Nashville, moved back to Texas, and he really kind of lets it rip and discovers his creative self in the 70s. And especially I think he discovered what an amazing instrument his voice was. His vocals in the 70s. I'm talking about things like Redheaded Stranger, like Stardust, but also some of the Willie and Family stuff, a lot of the gospel numbers. There's a gospel album from the 70s. It's the name's slipping from it, but he just does, I've been so into Willie and I've been listening to everything in keeping with that 70s theme, which I've just been so into his 70s stuff. Willie did put out, to my mind, one of the greatest Christmas albums ever, holiday albums ever, in 1979 called Pretty Paper, named for the title track, right? Pretty Paper, that Willie himself wrote. But then the rest of it is covers. Everything from Jingle Bells to Frosty the Snowman to, Silent Night, let's say. And it sounds so good because Willie's vocals, he's at the height of his powers. And it's mostly his touring band. But it's his touring band with Booker T on organs floating. It's such a cool sound. It's Willie's band plus Booker T with these organ licks, kind of floating in and around and through the music and words. And to me, it's just it's just an incredible Christmas album. And it's a great featuring of Willie's voice. And so it's that time of year, if you're looking for a holiday country classic, Willie's Pretty Paper is an extraordinary Christmas album. And I can't recommend it enough.
Well, that's perfect, Matt. We'll definitely be playing that at my house, and I hope all our listeners will give it a listen as well. Friend, thank you so much. Obviously, people should be listening, but not just listening, subscribing to Know Your Enemy. Is there anything else coming up that people should keep their eye out for?
Well, I'll just say, no, I'm not going to make any reckless predictions or say anything asinine at the end of this conversation, other than, take good care of each other. Reach out to the people you love, and there's no substitute for face-to-face friendship and interaction, organizing meetings, having fun together, so lean on your friends and listen to podcasts and subscribe to them, but don't forsake your real life friends and family and connections.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Really
Sorry.
Great. It's all right.
Very sweet ending. I forgot the nice little message he left us off.
Very, very, very nice. I hope people are already listening to Know Your Enemy and reading Matt's work in Dissent. But, really, really great having him on the podcast and appreciate hearing his perspective a lot, including the Willie suggestion, which I have to vouch for. Very much. This is the time to be hanging out, listening to Willie with friends and family. So,
I obviously don't go nearly as deep on with Willie, but I will say, And I don't actually listen to music anymore. And one of the songs that kind of makes me feel sad about that is like the reason why is not just that I don't, the main reason is I don't have enough time, but also music hits different. And a song like You Were Always on My Mind is really like emotional. And when I'm in my 20s, like, and I haven't actually had any kind of life experience or whatever, like songs that are very emotional like that, they kind of like, you can just enjoy all the emotion. Then if you've actually lived a life, it's like, this stuff hurts actually.
It
I'm
does.
kind of afraid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the songs. If I had to get tears going, just put that on and it would just make me cry my eyes out.
No, that's a beautiful thing. No, I know exactly what you mean. It is funny. It is funny thinking back when you're like 7 years old, listening to some like breakup song and be like, yeah,
Bro,
or listen to Linkin
P.
Park
Diddy,
and be like, I'm so numb. You know what I mean?
the Linkin Park one, yeah, I'm so afraid. Yeah, me like having really no problems. The one that makes me laugh is I remember recording P. Diddy's
Hell yeah.
Every Breath You Take to Notorious B.I.G.,
Yeah.
not having any idea that some people think that P. Diddy was responsible or at least played a role in the Biggie Smalls assassination. So it's
Oh, yeah.
crazy out there. But that's my Willie Nelson story.
I love that. I didn't know that. Well, before we run, I just wanted to give people some news, something we'll certainly be watching closely here at Left Reckoning. Y'all should be watching as well, which is this labor dispute between the Teamsters and Amazon. And we have an update here. Amazon workers across the United States gear up to strike this week, days before Christmas. Move comes after company failed to meet deadline to begin contract negotiations with workers in Staten Island. Going forward a little bit more in The Guardian, thousands of Amazon workers are gearing up to strike from Thursday, days before Christmas, over the tech giant's refusal to begin negotiations over a union contract. Union locals are preparing members for pickets and actions outside Amazon facilities around the United States. Amazon was given a deadline of the 15th of December to agree to open talks with workers at the company's JFK 8 warehouse in Staten Island, which became the first Amazon warehouse in the U.S. to win a union election. And we're now, I believe, I have this statement here from the Teamsters themselves. But we're seeing, this authorization has expanded. This is from the Teamsters. Amazon Teamsters at 4 Southern California facilities have overwhelmingly authorized strikes after the corporation's continued refusal to recognize their union and negotiate contracts. Teamsters at 7 Amazon facilities have now voted to authorize strikes, including workers in Illinois, JFK, DBK4, in New York City. And I'll just read this Sean O'Brien line here because I think it's a good one. The corporate elitists who run Amazon are leaving workers with no choice. Greedy executives pushing thousands of hardworking Americans to the brink. Amazon rakes in more money than anybody. They subject workers to injury and abuse at every turn, and they illegally claim not to be the rightful employer of nearly half of their workforce. This rigged system cannot continue. Amazon must be held accountable to workers and consumers alike. If workers are forced onto the picket line, Amazon will be striking itself. And some strong and good words there from Teamsters President Sean O'Brien. I mean, the movement that we have seen from the Teamsters in Amazon has been nothing short of amazing. This is the fight. And it's something that we'll certainly be reporting and covering on Left Reckoning, and people should really be tuning in, showing support, particularly if you're living in those areas. Figure out how you can help out, participate if there's calls for that.
And this game, it reminds me of, when Trump's on the debate stage, he's saying, I am, unlike you loser Republican Congressman Marco Rubio, I employed people. And so it rebounds to like Jeff Bezos' benefit. The reason he gets invited to places like the White House to talk about economic policies, because look at all these people he's putting to work. He's a job creator. But then when it comes to actually enforce labor policies, like, I don't know who the fuck that is. We use contractors.
Who's that? Yeah.
Yeah, who? Like,
somebody else is paying them. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's such a ridiculous.
It is such a fucking lie, and it's one of those things where you realize how much of like the American system is a scam. To say to the people who are going in day out working at these facilities, oh yeah, they're working for somebody else, not for us. Full bullshit, dude. Bullshit.
Yeah, some other company that just. Oh, I'm sure it would exist if not for finishing Amazon deliveries or whatever. Like, yeah, it's such a goddamn lie.
Yeah, well, full solidarity with the Teamsters. Folks,
Yep.
We're going to go over to the post-game. Sorry, unless you had something else to add there, Matt.
No, I have some fun AI stuff to talk about in the post-game. An investor is... Look, we both read the FT, David, and what I like the FT for is confirming my biases, and that is in the case of AI. It seems like investors getting a little bit skittish about, hey, we're going to see a return on some of this massive investment towards these things, or are we just supposed to expect aged pictures of John Lennon and Paul McCartney to like justify the millions of dollars toward it? So yeah, check that out in the post game.
Yeah, well, friends, we're only a few patrons away from 1,000. It'd be really great if we could hit that by the end of the year. So sign up, patreon.com/LeftRight, and get the post game, the Sunday show, and support Matt and I. We'll be right over there, friends. So come and see us.